Born 82 years before the Battle of Yavin on the planet Naboo to the aristocratic House Palpatine, Palpatine would quickly eschew his first name in favor of going by his house name alone. In 65 BBY, he met Hugo Damask, a Mune businessman who was in reality the Sith Lord Darth Plagueis. Under Plagueis' manipulation, Palpatine killed his father along with the rest of his family and pledged himself to his new master's dark side teachings as Darth Sidious. Palpatine lived a double life for many years, serving an untarnished career as Naboo's ambassador in the Galactic Senate, while learning from his master and training a young Zabrak as the Sith assassin, Darth Maul. As Plagueis privately searched for the key to eternal life, Palpatine manipulated galactic politics, culminating in the blockade of Naboo by the Trade Federation. In the wake of the political crisis, the Galactic Senate voted to elect Palpatine as Supreme Chancellor, and around at the same time, in accordance with Bane's Rule of Two, Sidious murdered Plagueis and usurped the role of Sith Master. As Chancellor of the Republic and Dark Lord of the Sith, Palpatine orchestrated the outbreak of the Clone Wars just 10 years later, manipulating the rise of the Confederacy so that he could play both sides of the war. The public leader of this splinter faction was Palpatine's new apprentice, Darth Tyrannus, the former Jedi Master Count Dooku. As billions perished in the war, the vast majority of Republic citizens rallied behind Chancellor Palpatine, giving him enough support to amend the Galactic Constitution in the name of security and transfer most of the Senate's executive authority to his own office. 19 years before the Battle of Yavin, following Dooku's death, Palpatine revealed his identity as Darth Sidious to the Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, telling the dark side teachings that Plagueis had pursued could help Skywalker save his wife. A failed attempt by the Jedi High Council to arrest Palpatine followed, and Skywalker pledged himself to Sidious's teachings as Darth Vader. All members of the Jedi Order were accused of treason and betrayed by their clone troops as the Great Jedi Purge began. Without the Jedi to oppose him, Sidious declared himself Emperor of the First Galactic Empire, bringing an end to the Republic that had stood for over 25,000 years. As Emperor, Palpatine effectively wielded absolute control over the entire galaxy and virtually everyone who lived within it. During his tenure, he built one of the most powerful military forces the galaxy had ever seen, and ruled unopposed for nearly 2 decades. However, many wished for this new tyranny to end, and as the Galactic Civil War broke out, Emperor Palpatine would ironically fight against a rebellion that he started in secret with the help of Vader's secret apprentice, Galen Marek. After the Empire suffered a devastating defeat at the Battle of Yavin, in which the Alliance destroyed the Death Star, the Emperor steadily began to lose his hold on galactic power. In 4 ABY, Palpatine gambled his chances in order to annihilate the Rebel Alliance once and for all, allowing Rebel spies to learn of the existence of a second Death Star and its secret location near Endor. As expected, the Alliance fell for the bait and dispatched its fleet to destroy the Emperor, Vader, and the incomplete Death Star. With the Alliance falling for his trap, Palpatine brought Luke Skywalker, the son of Darth Vader, before him in order to turn him over to the dark side and replace Vader with an apprentice who was younger and even more powerful. After goading Skywalker to give into his frustrations with the thought of the Alliance defeat and the death of his friends, the Dark Lord eagerly watched as father and son fought one another. However, Skywalker refused to submit to the dark side and spared his father, prompting Palpatine to unleash all of his rage and hatred on Skywalker. Unwilling to stand by and watch his son die from the agonizing effects of Palpatine's Force lightning, Anakin Skywalker finally redeemed himself, throwing his astonished master down the Death Star shaft, a sacrifice that fulfilled the prophecy of the Chosen One, and ensured that never again would the galaxy be subject to Sith rule. Luke Skywalker's birth was prophesied some 3 millennia before it happened, and his deeds would continue to be prophesied in the centuries to come, with the likes of Yoda, Bodo Bass, and Shah Kun sensing the coming of a great Jedi that would lead the Order to new heights. Luke Skywalker was born in 19 years before the Battle of Yavin, as the son of Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala. Luke was raised on Tatooine and hidden from Emperor Palpatine and his father, who had recently become Darth Vader. In 0BBY, Skywalker's life changed forever. A chance purchase of 2 droids, R2-D2 and C-3PO, led him to receive training in the ways of the Force from Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, along with meeting Han Solo and his twin, Princess Leia Organa. Skywalker then destroyed the first Death Star and joined the Rebel Alliance. Over the next few years, he fought in many of the most important battles of the Galactic Civil War, helping to found Rogue Squadron and fighting Imperial forces across the galaxy. In 3ABY, Skywalker received Jedi training from Yoda and learned from Vader that the Sith Lord was his father. 1 year later, he fought in the Battle of Endor and succeeded in turning his father back to the light. Thanks to Skywalker, Palpatine was killed and the Empire was dealt a crippling blow. Throughout the succeeding decades, Skywalker helped keep pace throughout the galaxy as the New Republic slowly defeated small remnants of the Empire. When Palpatine returned in the form of several clone bodies, Luke temporarily fell to the dark side and became the resurrected Emperor's apprentice. He was later redeemed with the help of his friends and continued with his goal of reviving the Jedi Order. Only 11 years after the Battle of Yavin, he founded the New Jedi Order and began teaching Force sensitives about the ways of the Force at the Jedi Praxium, fulfilling his destiny as the first of the New Jedi. In the midst of this rebirth came numerous challenges for Skywalker and his apprentices, and after a long series of failed relationships, Luke married fellow Jedi and former Emperor's Hand Mara Jade in 19ABY. Several years after the conclusion of the Galactic Civil War, Skywalker found himself on the front lines of the Yuuzhan Vong War, an invasion by the extragalactic Yuuzhan Vong species. During the war, Skywalker's wife gave birth to a son, who they named Ben after Ben Kenobi. Skywalker endured countless battles as the New Republic was first pushed back, including the fall of his home on Coruscant. However, the newly reformed government, labeling itself the Galactic Federation of Free Alliances, regrouped and helped push back the alien invaders. In the final stages of the war, Skywalker sought out the living world of Zonama Sekot, convincing the planet to join the Galactic Alliance in a final battle on Coruscant, in which Skywalker personally led the assault on the Supreme Overlord Chimera Germain Citadel and slew the War Master in question. Combined with the fact that his nephew Jacen Solo would soon kill Germain's puppet master Onami, the Yuuzhan Vong were defeated and the war was ended. After the Yuuzhan Vong War, Skywalker maintained a prominent role among the Jedi into the Dark Next Crisis, which saw him call a Jedi convocation to deal with the strife within the Order. Faced with disunity, Skywalker assumed the title of Grandmaster and direct control over the re-established Jedi Council. Despite the successful handling of the Dark Next Crisis and the following Swarm War, Skywalker was plunged into a dark time as his nephew, Jacen Solo, became a Sith apprentice under his old adversary and girlfriend, Lumaya, and slew his beloved Mara along with instigating the Second Galactic Civil War. His grief was further compounded by his discovery of Jacen, now named Darth Caedus, torturing his only son Ben. But, with the help of Ben, he recovered, and it was with Skywalker's aid that Caedus was killed by his twin sister Jaina, ending the war and restoring peace to the galaxy. In the aftermath of the war, Natasi Dala ascended to the position of Chief of State and fostered a widespread anti-Jedi sentiment, resulting in tensions between the Jedi Order and her government. Dala ultimately had Skywalker arrested for dereliction of duty, and in exchange for his freedom, he was exiled and forbidden from involving himself in the affairs of the Jedi Order or Coruscant itself. Skywalker and his son embarked on an odyssey across the galaxy in order to discover the causes of Jacen Solo's fall to the dark side. During their journey, Skywalker would pick up several arcane force powers that his nephew had mastered on a previous journey. Towards the conclusion of the journey, the Skywalkers encountered the lost tribe of the Sith, as well as a malevolent dark side entity known as Abeloth. Skywalker's Jedi would soon overthrow the corrupt reign of Dala, and Luke returned to his position as Grandmaster. Skywalker and his allies then repelled the Sith threat, and, with the help of an unlikely Sith ally, defeated Abeloth, preventing another disaster that could endanger the galaxy. At some point before the emergence of the Order of the One Sith, Luke would pass away and became one with the Force, guiding his descendants from the astral plane. Hello YouTube, this is the Phoenix Exalt bringing you the final installment of Season 1 of my Versus series. For this analysis, I will be using Emperor Palpatine during the time frame of Return of the Jedi, and Luke Skywalker from the time frame of Fate of the Jedi. I will be pulling from Legends continuity along with any canon materials that do not directly interfere with previously made Legends materials. Due to the fact that the Disney Story Group is going in a direction that is neither original nor creative, I will not be using canon as the main point of Star Wars media for my videos. And as for the 2008 show, Star Wars The Clone Wars, I will be using the episodes, arcs, and time materials for Palpatine that do not contradict or diminish his feats elsewhere in Star Wars lore. Additionally, I will not be touching on the Yoda vs. Palpatine duel in the show, as it was for all intents and purposes a dream sequence, and as such, not a real contest. As for the Dark Empire comic arc, I will be referencing it, but I will not be using Palpatine as presented in that arc, as it became clear that Palpatine was limited while inhabiting clone bodies, and could only use the Force for a limited number of times before his host body withered and died. With that out of the way, I would like to remind everyone watching that I own none of the characters, art, music, or other media depicted in this video, and all rights to them go to their respective companies. With that out of the way, I present to you the finale of Season 1, Emperor Palpatine vs. Grandmaster Luke Skywalker. If the most powerful individuals of the Jedi and Sith orders met on the battlefield, who would be the victor? Emperor Palpatine was an 86-year-old human male at the time of his death on the second Death Star, who stood at roughly 5'6" in height. Additionally, Palpatine was also suffering from a severe case of dark side degradation. His eyes were a golden color, his skin was pale and haggard, his posture was bent, and he apparently appeared incredibly brittle to the naked eye. Any physical accomplishment shown by Palpatine was entirely due to his use of Force-based physical augmentation, as a brittle 86-year-old should by all accounts crumble if he was so much as backhanded. That being said, if I don't use those feats, the physical analysis ends here, so I will examine them. Palpatine has been shown as being more than capable of matching the strength of Savage Opress and Darth Maul combined, as well as surpassing their speed and reflexes. Against Mace Windu, Palpatine was described by Anakin Skywalker as moving so fast that he was blurring in and out of existence. And unlike Windu, who was operating with a Vapad boost, Palpatine was all under his own power. Not much later, Palpatine would face off against Master Yoda, where he would be able to match, though not surpass, the Grandmaster's legendary speed, would even manage to showcase having more endurance than Yoda. However, at the end of the day, Palpatine was no physical combatant. He was a Force user through and through, and while there is nothing inherently wrong with this, it did leave him at a disadvantage in a physical contest. Luke Skywalker was a 64-year-old human male who stood at roughly 5'6" in height with a strong athletic build. As noted by the Essential Guide to Alien Species, humans were one of the most advanced races in the galaxy, possessing highly evolved brains, advanced hardiness, and adaptability to sudden changes in the environment. While his physical abilities were not what they were in his youth, he retained high levels of strength, agility, speed, and stamina, and he has kept pace with numerous members of the Lost Tribe of the Sith, the much younger Darth Caedus, Kip Duron, and many Yuzhong Vong warriors. He has won an endurance race on Dathomir that was fielded by only other Force sensitives, and has gone through numerous other tests of endurance as well, though more on that later. The light side of the Force is known for being able to sustain its users well into old age, and even lengthen their lifespan for some time. And Skywalker was no exception to this. Due to his own overconfidence, Luke lost his right hand during a duel with his father, and to have it replaced with a prosthetic. This prosthetic was typically coated in synth flesh, though due to its metallic nature, could be used as an effective bludgeon. Luke takes strength with where he was capable of carrying down Vader's defenses before his prime, and the lightsaber-resistant armor of the Yuuzhan Vong. Luke's agility was such that despite the fact that one cannot sense the Yuuzhan Vong through the Force, and therefore cannot use the typical precognition employed by forceful masters of the martial arts, he was still able to dodge incoming strikes from the warriors, slayers, and even the Supreme Overlord himself. In terms of speed, Luke was seen as a blur to bystanders, and was capable of thinking in terms of nanoseconds. As for his endurance, it was nothing short of prodigious. Against Darth Caedus, he would receive numerous injuries, including being poisoned, but would still be well enough to fight off his nephew and escape with his son. During his time on Sinkhole Station, Luke was left in a weakened state that his own estimation left him in such an exhausted state that he would later remark that his level of combative viability had dropped to that of fellow Council Master Kligal, who was a healer that rarely went anywhere near a combative zone. Despite this, he, along with his son Ben, were able to fight off a strike team of Lost Tribe of the Sith members that included Sith apprentices, Sith sabers, and at least 2 Sith lords. This event would begin the secret war between the Jedi Order and the Lost Tribe of the Sith, and it was at the end of this war that the most prominent feat of Luke would happen. During the battle for the Jedi Temple, Luke would be trapped inside the temple with fellow masters Corran Horn and Jaina Solo against 5,000 Sith, and the Force entity known as Abeloth. Despite Abeloth wanting Luke dead by this point in time, along with the Sith obviously aiming for the prize of slaying the most powerful Jedi to have ever lived, Luke and his companions fought them off for 2 days before making their escape. The 3 of them killed scores of Sith as the battle raged on, these Sith ranging from mere sabers to lords to possibly several High Lords. Despite all of this, Luke was by far the least injured of the 3, sporting only a concussion by the final minutes, and even tanking a blast of Abeloth's lightning before completing his mission and collapsing with his companions. After the battle, Luke would need what is implied to be a short period of time to recover, and even extracted from himself from the bacta tank early to retake command of the situation. He would be well enough to journey into the netherworld of the Force not long after and join forces with Darth Krayt to slay Abeloth once and for all. While not a damaged sponge like his mentor Kenobi, Luke was still a tank that could dish out just as much as he could take in, and then some. This verdict did not require much thought. Even allowing for Palpatine's vast Force reserves feeding into his physical augmentation, there's nothing he can do that Luke cannot. Luke can match Palpatine in speed, reflexes, and agility. He can overpower Palpatine with his strength, and can clearly take way more punishment than Palpatine, along with having a much higher endurance level. Additionally, Luke had over 2 decades of youth on his side, coupled with 0 dark side degradation. On top of that, Luke's metal hand represents a weapon he cannot be disarmed of without literally being disarmed. Due to all these factors, along with holding nearly every advantage, Luke Skywalker gets the edge in physical abilities. At one point in time, Darth Sidious was likely one of the greatest lightsaber duelists in the history of his order. He has been credited with a mastery of all 7 forms of classical lightsaber dueling, with a distinct preference for Form 7 Juyo. Palpatine had an extremely aggressive dueling style, and augmented his swordplay by using Force speed and strength. His style was a combination of brutal aggression and lethal precision, using Juyo as the barest framework of a seemingly free-form style. That being said, by the time of Revenge of the Sith, he was clearly out of practice, and by the time of Return of the Jedi, likely even more so. Hold on, let me explain before you click the comment button. To understand where I'm coming from, one must start with Palpatine's master Darth Plagueis. Plagueis had a noted disdain for combat, and if the novel named after him is anything to say about it, he rarely practiced, with the only times he was depicted sparring being during the training of Palpatine. This notion of eschewing combat for Force abilities was passed down to Palpatine, as evidenced by a direct quote from Palpatine himself. Quote, "The Sith grew past the use of lightsabers, but we continue to use them if only to humiliate the Jedi." End quote. This is not the quote of a dedicated lightsaber combatant, but rather someone who relied on their overwhelming force abilities should they ever find the need to fight another force wielder. Additionally, we also know that Palpatine is out of practice because of the circumstances that he was in. In order to keep one's skills sharp, one needs to actually use them, and Palpatine had precious little chance to do so. Even while Plagueis was alive, they rarely met, and shortly before Plagueis' death, there would be a 2-decade period in which the two would not meet face to face. While it is true that Palpatine would face Maul at least once while he trained him, such a young version of Maul could hardly be called a threat, and based on the way Palpatine describes the duel later, it seems clear he was going easy on him. During his time as Chancellor, Palpatine would rarely have time to himself, and what time he did have was put towards furthering the start of the Clone Wars, or managing both sides of the conflict. His only potential sparring partner that he could hope to face equally was Dooku, and Dooku was not someone that Palpatine could allow to believe that he was a similar power level, or skill level for that matter, especially considering that Dooku operated far away from his master and was in command of one of the largest armies the galaxy had ever seen. Additionally, Palpatine could not afford to cut loose during his time, for fear of allowing the Jedi to sense his presence, and it is telling that Palpatine chose to hide his preferred lightsaber in a statue in such a way that it could only be retrieved once, in a time of need, and there would be little way to hide what had been done to the statue. During his time as Emperor, he was granted under no such constraints. However, yet again, it is clear that he never sparred with Vader, and only pulled out his lightsaber on very rare occasions. Despite this, Palpatine would find the time to duel Darth Maul and Savage Opress on Mandalore during the Clone Wars. On Mandalore, he would slay Opress and defeat Maul. However, this duel also provides key insights into how Palpatine behaved as a combatant. During the duel, Palpatine is seen performing moves that should be either completely useless or downright suicidal. However, this is where Palpatine's physical augmentation comes into play. In the words of fellow YouTubers EvanNova95, Ready4, and JenSarai1, if a master swordsman faces off against a beginner, the master will win. However, if the beginner can move at the speed of light, then the master will be dead 1,000 times over before the first second has passed. While Palpatine is not a beginner, and he cannot move at the speed of light, the point remains the same. Palpatine could augment his speed and strength to ridiculous levels. His wide sweeping slashes that would leave any ordinary swordsman open to a deadly follow-up are of no issue, because he can so quickly recover it is as if there is no opening at all. His augmented strength is such that a butterfly block, or a behind the black block, that any fencer will tell you is to never be attempted in combat, does not result in Palpatine's death, but rather he instead pulls it off and uses it as an effective counter to disarm and kill his opponents. The reason that Palpatine is a crappy duelist, technically speaking, is also why he is near unbeatable. His force power is such that he can afford to perform maneuvers that would be suicidal to anyone else, but because he can augment his strength and speed to ridiculous levels, he doesn't need to have excellent technique. Against Windu and Yoda, we can see that he does not particularly show any true technique, with wild flips, corkscrews, and hack-and-slash cleaves that do not make any particular sense, but all of them somehow still work. The intention of this is not a bashing of Palpatine, but rather explaining what I see as factual. If your force powers are good enough that you can employ a somewhat shoddy version of Geo and stand toe-to-toe with Yoda, then do you really need to work on your technique? If you're the undisputed most powerful Sith Lord in galactic history, ruling the galaxy with an iron fist with the Jedi Order reduced to hermits in hiding, then do you really need to worry about practicing with your lightsaber? Or would you do as Palpatine did, and allow Vader to do the heavy lifting while he practiced with the Force? All that being said, even despite my criticisms of Palpatine's technique, he is still a Tier 1 duelist, and for anyone to underestimate him, there would be deadly consequences, as several Jedi found out the hard way. Luke Skywalker was the greatest lightsaber master of his era, possessing mastery in all 7 forms of classical lightsaber dueling, as well as the new Jedi Order's 3 rings of defense, along with the described 20 other forms of non-Jedi martial arts. Luke was initially trained in the basics of Shicho by Obi-Wan Kenobi in the hold of Millennium Falcon, and was later given further training in Ataru by Yoda on Dagobah. Despite this training, Luke's form would most closely follow in his father's footsteps, as he clearly preferred Form 5 to Gem So. However, this is not where Luke's style ends. Luke merely used Form 5 as a framework from which he incorporated the other styles of combat that he was capable of. The result was a strength-based counter-style that was widely unpredictable and varied. This caused Skywalker to look less like a Gem So stylist in favor of a strength-based Niman specialist. As for direct feats, Skywalker was able to best Darth Vader before his prime, along with several of Palpatine's Dark Jedi elite. During his prime, he faced down Supreme Overlord of the Yuuzhan Vong and slew him in single combat. A decade later, he would face down both Raynar Thul and Lomi Plo, defeating the former and killing the latter. The feat against Lomi Plo was especially impressive considering that during his first duel with her, she was invisible and undetectable by Luke. Just a few short years later, Luke would face down his nephew Darth Caedus in single combat, and while Caedus was taken out of the fight by Luke's own son Ben, Caedus himself admitted afterwards that Luke clearly had the upper hand. A few months later, Caedus would also admit that Luke Skywalker was the only swordsman that he did not dare face in single combat single-handedly. 2 years later, Skywalker would face down the Lost Tribe of the Sith, dueling with members of power levels in the low Tier 6 range to those at the mere upper Tier 2 range. Vestara Kai noted that during Luke's duel with High Lord Workin, Luke was backing the Sith into a corner, and likely would be able to capture him had she not intervened and ensured his death for her own agenda. Moving on to how this was implied in combat, Jaina Solo noted that Luke had a knack for using his opponent's momentum against them, causing her lunges and thrusts to become awkward and clumsy. In such a way, he appeared to use the defensive tenets of Form 3, Surisu, to draw out his opponent, allowing them to exhaust themselves upon him, all the while waiting for the ideal moment to strike. However, Luke would often use Gem So as a bridge to Ataru, using the acrobatics and physical integration to off-balance and eventually cut down his opponent. This usage of Ataru was confirmed in the Crimson Empire comic series, where a new Jedi Order training session is observed where Luke teaches his students the principles of Ataru. Perhaps most impressive is Luke's ability to learn through observation, even in the midst of combat. Many an observer has been astonished at how, after just a few minutes of fighting, Luke was able to not only mimic his opponent's style, no matter if he'd seen it before or not, but begin to actively tailor his style to his opponent and capitalize on his own strength while exploiting their weaknesses. This also lent into how Luke was able to make up so much ground so quickly when it came to the gaps in his training. From just one engagement, he was able to effectively copy Darth Vader's Gem So assault. He was able to pick up Ataru very quickly from Yoda, along with presumably the other forms he mastered. This ability meant that any protracted engagement against Luke meant certain death for his opponent, as there was no style that was beyond his reach, which meant that the only way one could hope to defeat Luke was by way of superior skill. Given Luke's level of skill with the blade, the amount of combatants that could hope to do this is ridiculously small. Once again, there is little room for debate, and once again, I will do my best to explain. For the moment, I will put aside the fact that Luke has a greater amount of experience than Palpatine, with both fodder and opponents of near equal skill. Additionally, I will also put aside the fact that Luke has feats just as equal, if not greater than equal, to Palpatine, And I will also put aside the fact that Luke is a dedicated martial artist, but Palpatine is not. Though I'll touch on that point later. If nothing else, we can use Luke's duel with the reborn Palpatine clone in the Dark Empire comic series as a form of evidence. And while I'm not using Palpatine's feats there, I am using all of Luke's appearances, and so it's fair game. There is little if any evidence to suggest that Palpatine improved his martial skill set from the time he was in hiding, and based on his previous showings, it is somewhat of a stretch to assume that he even kept his skills at the level they were at. Considering Palpatine has never been depicted training in any way with his lightsaber form after his initial training under Darth Plagueis, I will concede, however, that Luke was somewhat buffed at the time of the duel. This was a rather minor buff though, as a Force Harmony buff does not remotely compare to the level of a buff that Battle Meditation provides, as the two powers are very different in complexity and power level. Forgetting his small buff for a moment, Luke defeated the clone in just a few comic panels, which is not exactly a long duel. Transferring this into my verdict, this is somewhat similar to an early fight victory, and there is a case to be made that in Luke's rematch, he made a fool out of the Palpatine clone in terms of saber skills. However, many of you will also point out that Luke was defeated earlier in the comic series by a Palpatine clone, and to that I say, you're absolutely right. However, Luke bested the clone later, and he was not even at his peak in terms of lightsaber mastery yet, which means his skill set has only improved, with both more technical expertise with the rediscovery of the 7 classical forms, along with Luke adding several decades of experience to his resume. Next we move on to the simple fact that Luke is a dedicated martial artist. We can see this from his appearances in Legacy of the Force that he regularly spars with fellow Tier 1 and Tier 2 Jedi Council Masters, and he can put his money where his mouth is on the battlefield, by cutting down his enemies with his most notable struggles usually due to external factors such as the opponent's extraordinary power in the Force, their immunity to it, or Luke's mental state at the time, or a combination of all the above. Palpatine, however, is almost the exact opposite. After his initial mastery, Palpatine did not seem to work on his skill set ever again. An argument can be made that the training of Maul allowed him to revisit the art, though I find it somewhat unlikely. But even if that were true, Palpatine had roughly a 38-year gap in which it has never been mentioned that he has trained with his blade in the slightest, with the only times he drew the blade was against Maul and to press Mandalore, against Windu and Yoda and Coruscant, and once or twice to execute some rogue Jedi. The fact that he still carries his lightsaber on him at all was somewhat surprising to me, considering his almost strict aversion to personal combat, preferring instead to either manipulate opponents into their own defeat, or simply overwhelm them with the Force. Due to all these factors, I give Jedi Grandmaster Luke Skywalker the edge in martial arts and lightsaber dueling. Darth Sidious is confirmed to be the most powerful Sith Lord in galactic history, more powerful than all those that came before him, and all those that would come after. By how much of a margin this was, is unknown, though when looking at the likes of Darth Bane and Darth Krayt, we can see that it is not unheard of for a Sith Lord to get close to Palpatine's power level. Count Dooku, Luke Skywalker, and Darth Vader have all described Palpatine's Force presence as a black hole from which no light could escape. It has also been said that Palpatine's relationship with the dark side was so deep that the dark side was his possession, and him the dark side's possession. Luke Skywalker himself stated that Palpatine was the only truly irredeemable person he had ever met, and viewed Palpatine as the dark side's most powerful expression. There is some misconception as to what Palpatine was and was not capable of, however. Palpatine is not a master of all Force powers, nor is he capable of using all of them. This is due to a variety of reasons, one being that certain Force powers were not discovered yet. Some were only available to Lightsiders, and some powers cannot be learned and a user must be born with. However, before we get into the things Palpatine cannot do, let us examine what he can. As mentioned previously, Palpatine's mastery of physical augmentation was prodigious, allowing his brittle, elderly body to keep pace and in multiple cases simply outclass some of the greatest combatants of his era. It will come as no surprise that Palpatine is a master of telekinesis. During his battle with Yoda, he levitated several Senate pods simultaneously, including the one he was standing on, with incredibly dexterity and precision. Likewise, he was skilled enough with telekinesis that he was also able to remove Luke Skywalker's restraints without barely lifting a finger, meeting face to face on the second Death Star. He could also easily overpower the force shields of both Maul and Opress, ragdolling them and keeping them firmly pinned until he released them. He was incredibly proficient in the Force Choke, to the point that he can perform it to deadly effect without needing to see the target even when in large distances away, choking two Mandalorians to death even before arriving in their location. It was also known that Palpatine was capable of Force flight, though it was employed rarely. By far, Palpatine's favorite power was Force lightning, and was known to use this both as a lethal attack and as a way of torturing his enemies. If used to its full potency, he could instantly flash fry his victims. His proficiency with the power was such that despite launching his lightning at a Vapad-boosted Mace Windu, it not only nearly overwhelmed Windu, but also nearly caused Windu's saber to bend to Palpatine's will when locked in combat with the latter's lightning. Despite Yoda's ability with Tooth Menace, Palpatine was able to catch Yoda off guard with his lightning, throwing the Jedi Master into the wall, and later on in their duel was able to disarm him of his lightsaber with a powerful blast of it. Despite the Grandmaster's attempts to ground it and subsequently nearly overwhelmed Yoda's efforts to absorb it. However, it should be noted that Palpatine ultimately succeeded in absorbing the attack. This resulted in an explosion that not only overwhelmed and blasted Palpatine aside, but also separated Yoda from Sidious, allowing the Jedi to flee. As for telepathic abilities, Palpatine was nothing short of a Tier 1 master. His psychic commands could last years after his death, such as the case with Mara Jade. And as for his active abilities, he has actively dominated the minds of countless beings, but most notably that of General Grievous, who was normally resistant to such attacks. As an offshoot, Palpatine was capable of Sith battle coordination. The power involved the standard battle meditation, crossed with psychic domination. Most notably, Palpatine used this during the Battle of Endor. However, the power came with two hidden costs. The first was that over time, commanders would become used to fighting while being controlled, and as such their effectiveness could be reduced when not operating under the power. The second cost was that the user was suddenly pulled out of the meditation by an attack, or in Palpatine's case by his death. Those under its influence will receive a much sharper blow to their morale and effectiveness as opposed to being pulled out of normal battle meditation, Palpatine's death being a major cause of the defeat over Endor, despite the Empire's greater naval strength. Palpatine would grow to become a highly accomplished and knowledgeable master of Sith sorcery. He rediscovered the long-forgotten art of creating chrysalids, and used it to alchemically alter rancors and fearsome chrysalis beasts that he used as pets at his citadel on Biss. Palpatine was also capable of pyrokinesis, an offshoot of telekinesis that was centered around manipulating flames, though whether or not Palpatine could actually summon flames like some members of the Night Sister tribe is unknown. Palpatine also rediscovered the ability of essence transfer, capable of shunting his consciousness into any body that had a will weak enough to allow him to do so. Next we have Force Strain, which Palpatine seemed to be able to use to some extent against the population of Biss, though he has not been shown using the power in combat with near the proficiency that Darth Nihilus and Krayt achieved. Palpatine's most powerful power was the Force Storm ability, a dark side technique which he himself discovered, and that had enough power to kill an entire world. Using his anger and his will, he was able to rip the space-time continuum and create a hyperspace wormhole. This wormhole could cause instant destruction or specifically transport a being to a location of his choosing. However, Given how grand scale the Force ability was, and given that Palpatine himself noted it takes intense concentration, its usefulness in single combat and on an even playing field is negligible. Now we come to the things that Palpatine cannot do, and to put it simply, almost any ability that I have not already mentioned he cannot perform. To illustrate why this is the case, I will use the example of Shatterpoint and Dark Transfer. First and foremost, Palpatine has never been credited with the Shatterpoint ability, and furthermore, none of his depictions have ever even alluded to him having the power. This leads to Palpatine also not having the Dark Transfer ability, which Palpatine is unable to use for two reasons. The first is it was not discovered until over a century after Palpatine's death, and the next is that Shatterpoint is a direct prerequisite to Dark Transfer, and therefore Palpatine will not have access to that ability either. This is not a fault of Palpatine, nor is this intended to diminish his accomplishments. But too many times do people overestimate Palpatine simply because of his power level. Is he Tier 1? Yes. Is he near the very top of Tier 1? Also yes. Does this mean he's invincible? No. Luke Skywalker is the most powerful Force user in galactic history. In the words of George Lucas himself, Luke Skywalker contains the same potential as Anakin Skywalker, and represents what Anakin would be had he reached his full potential. Luke's power was such that he was sensed light years away by the lost tribe of the Sith. He was described by Lady Rhea as very powerful in the Force, strong in the light side of the Force, a great Jedi Master. His presence was described as a shining beacon of light by all those who sensed it, with Jason Solo describing it as a star going supernova. As the greatest martial artist of his day, physical augmentation was an old friend, showing off the superhuman feats common to all Jedi, with observers noting that he could effortlessly pull off feats of strength and acrobatics that would tax a much younger man. Moving on to direct applications of the Force, Luke Skywalker was a master of the Jedi mind trick, the beast control ability, farsight, Force sense, long-distance communication, projective telepathy, which he once used to summon every Jedi in the galaxy to his location, Force healing, which he used to heal himself from fatal injury in mere hours, battle meditation, battle melds, battle mind, which is battle meditation but for single combat, using the Force to erase memories, otherwise known as the memory rub, astral projection, pain resistance, Mekuduru, the Aang-T Force Trance ability, the Aang-T Fold Space ability, which allows him to teleport objects at will, Mind Walking, which allowed him to become one with the Force while still alive and return to the land of the living, Force Projection, Voice Projection. From the Falanasi, he became an adept of the White Current, which allowed him to create illusions much more powerful than the standard that were much harder, if not impossible, to dispel as compared to normal illusions. He was a master of Shatterpoint, and it was implied to have taken the power to the mental level that only Mace Windu had before him. He had the power of immovability that allowed him to root himself in the Force to become the very essence of an immovable object so that he could not be moved by even the black hole at the center of the galaxy. He was capable of shutting down in the Force to become undetectable to other Force wielders, but unlike any other user of the power, he could selectively shut down, remaining hidden from all except those he chose to reveal his presence to. His Force jump ability allowed him to fall from low orbit unscathed. On the offensive, his signature green Force lightning, he could instantly kill one or multiple targets if he chose to. On the defensive with Tutaminis, he could absorb anything from blasters to the heat of a volcano to Force lightning to lightsabers. And while on Keldor, the home Doran, Luke would study under the Baron Dos Sages, learning the Hassett-Dur technique known as Lightning Rod, as if performed during a storm incorrectly, the user would be repeatedly struck by lightning and killed. He would also learn the Anya Seth technique, translated to Dead Brain. The technique provided an immunity to mental intrusion, along with an ability to appear dead on brain scanners. On Nam Chorus, he learned Mamotherapy, which allowed him to not simply erase memories, but to physically separate them, along with personality traits from a target's mind, and either take them into himself or release them into the Force. During the final battle of the Yuuzhan Vong War, Luke was able to achieve a oneness with the Force that was described as a maelstrom of luminous Force energy, against which there was no shelter. So calm and focused was he that his actions were not interrupted by any thought. Luke merged with the Force to such a degree that the Jedi Master did not seem to be there, physically or as an individual personality. Luke's control over his lightsaber blade was so great that he was said to might as well have been wielding 10 or 20 lightsabers against the Vong. Over a decade later, he would once again display the ability by drawing on the Force so heavily while in Abeloth's grasp that his cells began bursting with the power, and his skin glowed gold with the power he was drawing upon. Such was the power flowing through Luke that the mere act of restraining Luke harmed Abeloth. Keep in mind that Abeloth was a Force entity and virtual demigod that was practically made of Force energy and could only be truly killed by the Mortis dagger shown in the Clone Wars TV show. But despite that, she was harmed by Luke simply drawing on his full potential, not any specific attack. Luke also showed his connection long after his death by becoming a Force spirit and guiding the hand of his descendants. As for telekinesis, it should be no surprise that his displays were some of the most powerful in the Star Wars mythos. His basic pushes and shoves scattered entire groups of adversaries and created cyclones in their wake. He was more than proficient at using them to guide Jedi shadow bombs to their targets, along with pulling down AT-ATs. When the situation called for it, he could up the ante and cause massive levels of destruction. His amped pushes caused distortions of reality with their power. He has even used them to devastate entire armies of Yuuzhan Vong, and considering the Vong's immunity to the Force, this was especially impressive. Finally, we go to the feat that was only ever duplicated by Kip Duran: black hole manipulation. During the Vong War, Luke used telekinesis to take hold of an artificial black hole created by Dovin Basils, and manipulate it for his own benefits. Keep in mind how heavy black holes are. As for single combat, Luke Skywalker alongside Darth Krayt would duel Abeloth in the netherworld of the Force, in what is described as the hardest fight of Luke's life. In the netherworld, Abeloth was virtually unrestricted in terms of being able to use her power, and so this was the first time that Luke had met someone who he could not overwhelm through sheer power. Despite this, Luke and Krayt would manage to defeat Abeloth, and Luke would even be able to fend off a betrayal by Krayt before finally coming out on top, though not without major injuries. This feat is especially impressive as in the netherworld of the Force there are no weapons, which mean the only viable means of attack are via physical combat and Force abilities. And so this was one of the few instances that we see Luke have to face off against an opponent without his lightsaber, and he was not hampered by it. At this point, there's not much more left to say about him. Grandmaster Luke Skywalker is the most powerful Jedi in galactic history, and it shows. This is the category in which Palpatine has the most chance to flex his muscles, and so I will attempt to give an incredibly thorough explanation. To start off with, Luke obviously has the edge in the amount of confirmed abilities and direct feats, as his far greater exposure as a character allowed him to quickly rack these up. Next, Luke's edge in the power department is not up for debate. It is incredibly clear that Luke Skywalker is intended to be the most powerful Force user ever, with the same potential as Anakin, except Luke fully realized his. Next, this does not on its own grant Luke the edge, as multiple abilities do not apply to combat, and if he can't keep pace with Palpatine's focused power, he could be killed. To explain this verdict, I will go through each power for Palpatine, and list of its combat applicable, and if so, does their opponent have an encounter. For Palpatine, his physical augmentation feeds into the martial arts and physical category, and not really applicable in a Force duel. Likewise, Palpatine has not shown an ability with combative Sith sorcery like Exar Kun or Darth Zana, and so those powers will not come into play. His Force Drain does not seem to be advanced to the personal combat stage and therefore is not applicable. His ability with Essence Transfer would definitely fail against someone with the power and will of Luke Skywalker. The Force Storm ability is likewise caused into question, considering how grand scale it is, along with the intense concentration required to pull it off. Palpatine's telekinesis is astounding, and it is something to behold on the battlefield. However, the viability of a direct force push is called into question when you consider Luke's power of immovability. As for hurtling loose objects or even large objects, this would be a viable means of attack. Palpatine's pyrokinesis is impressive, though considering it seemed to require a flame to already exist, the ability is called into serious question. And even if he could create an open flame, Luke has shown that he is able to deal with such attacks. And even if he could create a force shield that could effectively block the flames. As for telepathy, I was initially torn on it, considering how potent Palpatine's powers with it are. However, once I realized that Luke had an ability that successfully guards against mental intrusion, this became null and void. Finally, we move on to the main event, Force Lightning. The question becomes, can Luke's Tutuminus absorb Palpatine's lightning? Short answer, yes. As for the long answer, we can see with Palpatine's duel with Yoda that beings of roughly equal power can successfully absorb Palpatine's lightning. That being said, Palpatine's power level increased in the roughly 15 years since his duel with Yoda. But, yet it would not be enough. As previously stated, Luke's developed power eclipsed that of Palpatine's, as did Luke's raw strength. Therefore, the question of whether he can take the power is much less important than the question of is Luke's Tutuminus developed enough to absorb the power. Again, the answer is yes, because while he has not been directly shown doing so, the fact that Luke developed the rest of his skills to their Tier 1 level makes the idea that he somehow didn't develop his Tutuminus as well extremely unlikely. Moving on to Luke, I will quickly remove any power that doesn't apply to single combat. I will also remove all telepathy-related powers. While his powers are potent, Luke rarely if ever uses them in combat, and therefore they will likely not come into play. Luke's force healing is incredibly fast, but not fast enough for single combat. Teleporting objects is useful, but in a force duel it is ultimately just a trick. His powers with illusions could potentially work on Palpatine, considering the white current's potency even on those that are a member of it. Luke's powers of stealth are amazing as well, but on an even playing field, Palpatine would be able to see him at the start of the match, so they are rendered moot. Moving on to what Luke could do to actually kill Palpatine, it is likely that Palpatine's force barrier could stop any direct force pushes, and hurling objects have the same benefit as Palpatine doing so, and so it cancels out. Shatterpoint is of course an excellent ability to have, though it is somewhat circumstantial as to if it would work or not. As for Force Lightning, the question would be if Luke would use it, and if so, could Palpatine block it? The answer to the first is that in a Force duel, Luke probably would. As for Palpatine, it is a maybe. It is plausible that Palpatine has defenses for lightning of an equal or near equal power to his own. Would these defenses work on the other hand is unknown, as they have never been tested with an adept of Luke's power level, though the effectiveness of this ability is washed to the side considering Luke's ability to become one with the Force. Palpatine has no answer to this whatsoever, mostly because he could have never seen it before and because the ability is just that powerful. Luke is already the most powerful Force user ever, and he can add to this with an ability that amps his performance even further, so much so that his very touch can harm a Force demigod. This is more than anything is the straw that breaks the camel's back for Palpatine, even forgetting the experience difference in that Luke has fought multiple opponents of power level at or greater than Palpatine, while Palpatine can only claim Yoda in terms of Force duels. There is simply something that cannot be changed no matter what Palpatine could do. Luke is more powerful than Palpatine, with more abilities and with equal, near equal, or even greater potency in those abilities. Grandmaster Luke Skywalker gets the edge in Force abilities. Emperor Palpatine was typically armed with a single-bladed lightsaber of elegant design, powered by a red synthetic crystal. Notably, it had an electrum finish and was constructed with frick alloy. The alloy allowed his weapon to be incapable of being destroyed by another lightsaber in the middle of a duel. Other than extreme durability, the lightsaber provided no extra benefits other than familiarity with his own handiwork. Palpatine also wore the black Sith robes of his order, with there appearing to be no special benefit to its function other than for clothing purposes. Luke Skywalker carried the same lightsaber for the great majority of his career, and while he would construct other lightsabers, these were for special cases, and typically he would only wield one. The lightsaber in question was based off the weapon of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and it would be powered by a green synthetic crystal that allowed for both increased cutting power without sacrificing maneuverability. The blade provided no special benefits, and neither did his black Jedi Grandmaster robes. Luke did carry pieces of farm equipment on his belt, many of which was the same materials that he carried when he first met Obi-Wan Kenobi on Tatooine. However, none of the equipment was likely to have an effect on the fight, except as possibly a force-thrown projectile. Due to there being virtually no difference in their equipment and weapon sets, no edge will be given for this category. And now, the verdict. For this fight, let's say it takes place where the rivalry between light and dark began, the fields of the ancient Jedi homeworld of Tython, with multiple loose objects of various sizes for the combatants to use. Additionally, let us assume that for the purpose of this fight, neither combatant recognizes the other, because one or both combatants recognizing each other would cause an uneven playing field. Additionally, neither combatant will have time to prepare for the battle, and the fight will start with both combatants in full view of each other. As a final tally for this matchup, I see the victor winning 10 times out of 10. This will be a description of one majority victory. Let us begin. The fight between these two powerhouses would never end so early, though the saber duel portion of the fight probably would, more on that later. A key point of how Luke Skywalker fights is that he scales his response to the power of his opponents. While he has truly cut loose against Abeloth, he did not do so against a large portion of the Lost Tribe. Considering that Luke would be going into this fight blind, he would not know the exact threat level of his opponent, though he would sense Palpatine's power. Luke's defenses are enough that he would be able to dispel any early attacks by Palpatine. As for my comments on the saber duel, given Palpatine's preference for his force abilities, it is entirely plausible that Palpatine may choose to never draw his lightsaber. However, if he did and he crossed blades with Luke, he would soon realize that Luke's superiority as a martial artist. At that point, Palpatine would disengage as he did with Yoda and focus on a force duel, where he can leverage his power. On Luke's end, he would quickly realize his opponent's skill and power, and would likely have his defenses on high alert for the rest of the fight. Any major hits Luke would take would therefore be in the very opening stages of the early fight, before he had enabled all of his active defenses. As for what would happen if he took a hit, Luke has shown on multiple occasions that he is capable of taking hits from incredibly powerful opponents in both a physical and force sense, and not only survive, but to continue the fight. The mid-fight would see Palpatine ramping up the power and Luke going from merely defending against attacks to actively responding. Palpatine's telekinesis would be matched by Luke's own. Palpatine's lightning would be absorbed or redirected back at its caster. Thrown objects would either be stopped or disappear in a flash of emerald light. Palpatine would increasingly draw on his hatred, drawing on his power in the way that he had against Windu and Yoda. This hatred and anger would only be exacerbated by Luke's continued survival. Unlike his match against Windu, Palpatine did not wish to prolong the fight for the sake of a third party. Unlike against Yoda, he would not feel the Jedi Grandmaster before him begin to tire as time wore on. He would only feel Luke as all others felt him, a beacon of light whose brightness was such that it purged all darkness he came across. Fortunately for Palpatine, anger fueled his power. Unfortunately for Palpatine, this did not change the reality of the situation that Luke had experienced with facing adversaries more powerful than Palpatine and who would know what to do in such a scenario. The late fight would see this fight reach its inevitable conclusion. By this point, Palpatine would be ramping up his power to its highest levels. He would be drawing on his rage, his hatred, his anger, and likely by this point, his fear. Luke, by contrast, would be in his element, moving as a blur, displaying emerald lightning from his fingertips and hurling boulders at the Dark Lord before him. He would be drawing on the Force heavily at this point, and it would be at this point that one of two things happened. The first is that Luke would deduce that he could overcome his enemy with his own abilities, with time, and would not mind the war of attrition that would follow as he slowly whittled down his opponent. The other would be that Luke would decide not to risk it, and he would once again merge with the Force. To explain this ending, I will draw parallels with the popular animated television show Avatar: The Last Airbender. During the series finale, Avatar Aang and Fire Lord Ozai would face off in a final showdown. It would be towards the end of the fight that Aang's avatar state would be triggered. His abilities would receive a major boost, and his Ozai would be forced to flee for his life. Luke's ability to merge with the Force functions similarly to the Star Wars equivalent of an avatar state. Luke's abilities would receive a major boost, and he would become a force of nature. Palpatine's choices at the moment Luke entered to this state would be two: stand and be destroyed, or flee and be methodically hunted down and forced to surrender or die. Either way, the result is the same. And thus, Luke Skywalker, son of the Chosen One, the Redeemer of Darth Vader, who was at one point the last known Jedi alive and is now the Grandmaster of the New Jedi Order, is declared the victor. Inspiration for this matchup came from the obvious desire to pit the most powerful members of the Jedi and Sith orders together at their prime. As for an explanation on the verdict, this one was a lot more simple than many previous matchups. Luke is undeniably in better physical shape, and he's undeniably better martial artist, as he has mastered everything that Palpatine did, but unlike Palpatine, hybridized his own personal technique and most importantly continued to hone his skills on and off the battlefield throughout his life. For most cases, Palpatine walks into any matchup with those two disadvantages and still comes out on top, but in this case, he just cannot. Palpatine is used to being the most powerful thing in the room, but in this case, he wouldn't be. What's more, Palpatine's skill set translates well to most combatants. But against Luke, his best chance would be to use something that Luke had never seen before, and that just wouldn't be the case this time around. Luke has seen pyrokinesis in the hands of the Night Sisters, he has seen Force Rain from Darth Krayt, he has seen Force Storms, and he has definitely seen Force Lightning and Telekinesis. Some may argue that there is nothing in Luke's arsenal that Palpatine can't deal with. While I would disagree with that on the principle that Palpatine has never been confirmed with studying under any of the obscure Force groups that Luke has, this is ultimately overshadowed by the fact that it wouldn't matter if he had. While Palpatine's Force reserves are immense, Luke's are virtually limitless. Therefore, while it could take hours of combat, it would be Palpatine, and not Luke, who would burn out first. As for what Luke would end the fight with, is up to the imagination. Perhaps it is a burst of Force Lightning, or perhaps a telekinetic wave that atomizes the Sith Lord, or perhaps it is something as simple as a lightsaber to the heart or a boulder to the face. The result is the same. Luke Skywalker is victorious. That being said, keep in mind that this is all my opinion of a hypothetical matchup, and feel free to leave comments, criticisms, or suggestions for future matchups in the comments down below. As a reminder, I will be taking suggestions for future Season 2 matchups, and these suggestions can be in the form of a specific matchup or simply a character you would like to see me use. Thanks to the current fan input, I have 2 spots left for next season, so get those suggestions in quick. Those of you that suggest a matchup that is featured will receive a shout out at the beginning of the video that you suggested and not before. And yes, if you suggest a matchup that has already been suggested or I have already decided on, you will still receive credit. Next, we have a quickie channel update. As this is the end of Season 1, many of you will be wondering when Season 2 will be coming. Not to worry, I will not wait forever. My current plan will be to take at least a month-long hiatus, if not slightly longer. However, this time will not be spent idle. I will be writing, recording, producing Season 2 during this time. However, I will wait until a majority of the videos have been completed before I start the posting process. Right now, the plan is for weekly uploads for the season, with 12 currently planned matchups. The hiatus is descended for me to create a backlog of videos and to reduce pressure on releasing them on schedule, as they will have already been completed. This will also allow for the real world to affect Season 2 less, as the videos will be on a scheduled upload and will not be reliant on me finding the ideal time to get everything done. As for the details of Season 2, I am looking to further polish the presentation of the verdict, along with a few other things I will experiment with as I test the viability of certain features available to me with my equipment. The only thing that I should be expected is a schedule for Season 2. This will be posted roughly a week or two before the premiere, and by that point any fan suggestions will be postponed to Season 3, and Season 2's roster will be locked in. With that out of the way, I would like to thank you all so very much for getting this far and finishing off the final episode of my Versus series. This channel was started in January of 2017, and the first Versus video took me some 3 months to make. Moving on to today, and quite literally everything about the process in which I make videos has changed, in my opinion, for the better. None of this would be possible without my admittedly tiny audience, who nonetheless will take the time out of their day to let me know that I have created something worthwhile. And while I know the wait for Season 2 will be a while, and possibly very long, I hope you all will still be there when I return. This is the Phoenix Exalt, signing out, and may the Force be with you, always.